empty auction left me with a Miradorn ship. What I found inside terrified me. The auction hall was alive with the sounds of clinking glasses, low chatter, and the hum of hovering droids carrying refreshments. Jarek adjusted his worn jacket and glanced around. He was far from the wealthy elite of the core worlds, but he had a knack for finding opportunities where others saw trash. Today, that skill had brought him to the far edge of known space, to a derelict starship auction on Rim Station Delta 7. Ships lined the massive docking bay, most battered and broken, their hulls scarred by centuries of neglect. Dust coated every surface, and the faint smell of ozone and rust filled the air. Each vessel was a gamble, and Jarek had learned long ago that the best finds were often the ones others ignored. His eyes caught a ship tucked into a shadowed corner of the hall, almost invisible. It was sleek, unlike the rusted freighters surrounding it. Its lines were elegant, almost alive, as if it had been designed not just for function but for perfection. The auctioneer had not even included it in the catalog. No one else was paying attention to it. This one, Jarek muttered to himself, stepping closer. The ship bore the mark of the Miradorn, a long-extinct alien civilization known for their obsession with perfection and secrecy. Their vessels were rare, and almost always found abandoned after centuries of war or experimentation. Most considered them cursed. Only a fool or a bold opportunist would bid on one without knowing its history. Jarek grinned. "Bold, that's me," he whispered. When the auction began, the usual clamor of bidding rose and fell. Rusted freighters went for a fraction of their scrap value. Antique cargo haulers drew minor attention, but the Miradorn ship sat silent, untouched. Finally, on impulse, Jarek raised his hand. "I'll bid 50,000 credits," he said. The room fell silent for a moment. The auctioneer raised an eyebrow. 50,000?
For this forgotten relic? Jarek didn't flinch. Do I have to explain myself? No. One else moved.
The bid stood. The auctioneer tapped his tablet, eyes widening as he realized nobody else had even considered the ship. "Sold," he announced almost reluctantly. "To the human, Jarek Taran." A murmur swept through the room. A human had just claimed a Miradorn vessel without a fight. Jarek didn't wait for congratulations. He moved quickly toward the ship, a thrill running through him. As he approached, he noticed the details he had studied in his reference guides. The smooth silver alloy hull that seemed to shimmer even in the dim light, the faint glyphs etched along the side glowing faintly like tiny stars. "Beautiful," he breathed. He stepped onto the boarding ramp. The airlock hissed as it opened, and a soft blue light filled the interior. The moment he entered, the hall behind him seemed to disappear. The corridors were long, narrow, and impossibly clean, as if the ship had been waiting for someone or something to awaken it. There was no dust, no sign of decay. It smelled faintly metallic, but not unpleasantly so. Every surface reflected light in a way that made it feel alive. Jarek's fingers traced the walls, careful not to touch the glowing glyphs. "This is unreal," he whispered. As he explored, he noticed the control deck. Panels hummed quietly, their alien symbols glowing softly. No human interface existed here, yet Jarek instinctively knew he could figure it out. He placed his hand on the nearest console. Immediately, a holographic display lit up, showing schematics of the ship. Lines of energy pulsed along the walls as if the ship itself were acknowledging him. He stepped back, heart racing. "It's alive," he muttered. And then he heard it. A faint whisper, like a voice carried through the corridors by the hum of the ship. Not in words he recognized, but in rhythm, tone, and intent. The ship was communicating, sensing him. Jarek's human instincts kicked in. Where most aliens would have retreated, overwhelmed by the unknown, he pressed forward. Curiosity and courage had always been humanity's strength. They had survived in the galaxy not because of power or technology, but because of adaptability, and Jarek was about to prove it. As he made his way deeper, he discovered the living quarters. They were empty, pristine, and silent. Walls were lined with pods and devices he didn't recognize. Some hummed softly, others remained dormant. It was clear the crew had vanished. Suddenly, Jarek wondered why. Then he saw the captain's quarters. A single, larger pod rested in the center, etched with intricate Miradorn glyphs. He approached it carefully. The pod's surface pulsed faintly, as if it were alive. A chill ran down his spine. "Why would a human like me find this?" he whispered. He reached out. The pod opened with a soft hiss, revealing a holographic recording. A Miradorn captain appeared, translucent and flickering. The alien's eyes glowed faintly, filled with urgency and fear. It spoke in rapid Miradorn, but the ship's interface translated the words, "Warning. Do not attempt to awaken the entity. It is beyond comprehension. We failed. We perished." Jarek's brow furrowed. Entity? What entity? The hologram flickered and ended, leaving a silence that pressed against him. The air felt heavier, charged with energy he could not see. After 5, he realized this ship was not just a vessel. It was a prison, and whatever had been contained here was waiting. Despite the warnings, Jarek's curiosity overpowered fear. Humans were explorers by nature. They thrived where others hesitated. He stepped onto the control deck and activated the main systems. Lights glowed. Energy flowed through circuits he could barely comprehend. The ship hummed as if awakening from a long slumber. A map appeared, showing the star systems around Rim Station Delta. 7. But beyond the map, deeper layers revealed hidden sectors, corridors beyond the physical ship, and pockets of energy Jarek had never seen. He realized the ship was capable of warp jumps that no human vessel could achieve. This is a gift," he whispered, but he could feel it too, the subtle pull of something dark, lurking, almost sentient. The ship was alive, but not entirely. It was holding something back. He spent hours exploring, touching panels, observing holograms, and learning alien systems with a mix of instinct and logic. He had always been good at puzzles. Humans had a way of thinking sideways, outside the rigid lines of rules. That was why they survived on worlds no other species could. As the hours passed, Jarek began to feel the ship responding to him. Panels lit as he approached. Corridors shifted slightly to guide him. He realized something incredible. The ship trusted him, and with trust came danger. Night fell over Rim Station Delta. 7, though the ship was still in the docking bay. Jarek finally sat in the captain's chair, his mind racing. The auction, the ship, the strange energy, all of it felt like more than coincidence. He had found a Miradorn ship where no one else dared to look. That in itself was human luck, combined with human boldness. A sudden noise made him freeze. Footsteps? No! The ship itself seemed to pulse. He could feel it vibrating beneath him, almost like a heartbeat. A soft, melodic tone resonated through the deck, almost like a voice trying to communicate in sound rather than words. Jarek closed his eyes, listening. The longer he stayed, the more he realized the ship was trying to teach him, to show him things that the Miradorn never wanted anyone to understand. But there was a warning in it, too. A faint, unshakable feeling that something dangerous had been left inside. He shook his head. Fear could wait. For now, the discovery was too thrilling. Humans had faced worse and survived. That had always been their strength. Courage in the face of the unknown, and the audacity to act when others would cower. Jarek leaned back in the captain's chair, hands on the controls, staring out into the empty docking bay. The Miradorn ship was his now. What lay within was still a mystery, but he knew one thing for certain. Humanity was about to leave its mark on the galaxy in ways the Miradorn could never have imagined. And for the first time, he smiled. Jarek didn't sleep that night. He stayed in the captain's chair, hands resting lightly on the glowing controls of the Miradorn ship. Though Rim Station Delta, 7 slept in quiet darkness. The ship hummed softly around him, alive in ways he couldn't fully understand. The faint glow of alien glyphs cast shadows across the walls, moving as if the ship itself was breathing. Hours passed, or maybe minutes. Time felt strange inside the vessel. Jarek had never experienced anything like it. He touched panels, poked at holographic displays, and tried to access the ship's memory banks. Each command he tried was met with a pulse, a flicker of light that felt like acknowledgement. The Miradorn ship wasn't broken. It was waiting. And for something. By the third hour, Jarek realized he was not alone. A soft vibration ran through the deck beneath his feet. The holographic display shimmered and shifted, forming a new image, a floating translucent figure of the ship's last captain. The Miradorn captain's eyes glowed faintly, more vivid than before. Its voice rang in Jarek's mind, clear and translated, "You are not like us. You think differently. Be careful. The entity is awake. It watches." Jarek leaned forward, fascinated. The Miradorn language had always been difficult, even for scholars with decades of study. But the ship's translation system rendered it into human words almost instantly. "Entity? Awake?" Jarek said, his voice echoing slightly in the empty corridor. "I've barely touched this ship." The captain's hologram pulsed, then gestured to the ship's deeper sections. Symbols and glyphs floated in the air, showing energy flows that twisted like living threads. The alien AI explained in broken, fragmented sentences that the Miradorn had tried to merge their consciousness with a dark energy entity from beyond the galaxy, a being so ancient and powerful that it had no true form. Their experiment had failed. Their minds were gone. The entity had been sealed inside the ship, but not destroyed. Jarek felt a chill run down his spine. His pulse quickened, not with fear, but with the thrill of discovery. Humans were fearless explorers by nature, and he had never turned away from a challenge.
"All right," he whispered, leaning closer to the hologram.
"Let's see what you're hiding." The Miradorn ship had corridors and rooms beyond the physical ones Jarek had explored. He moved cautiously, noting that the walls pulsed faintly, almost like a heartbeat. The deeper he went, the stronger the sense of being watched became. Panels flickered, corridors curved impossibly, and sometimes the ship seemed to shift slightly, guiding him along paths it wanted him to take. Jarek reached what appeared to be the central control hub for the ship's experimental systems. Here, the energy of the entity was strongest. A shimmering black mass floated in a containment field, barely visible but radiating heat, light, and a strange, alien consciousness. It twisted and pulsed, responding to his presence. The Miradorn AI spoke again. "Do not touch. It learns. It feeds. It will destroy." Jarek studied the energy carefully. He could feel its intelligence. Not human, not alien, but something far older. He remembered stories of explorers who had faced ancient horrors and perished. But Jarek was human. Humans had survived centuries by thinking, adapting, and taking risks. And he had a plan. He accessed the ship's control panels. The containment field was fragile, maintained by systems that had been damaged during the Miradorn experiment. With careful adjustments, Jarek stabilized the field, creating a buffer between the entity and the rest of the ship. He worked slowly, every move measured. He didn't have Miradorn instincts, but he had human intuition. Where the Miradorn had relied on rigid logic, Jarek relied on improvisation, and that was exactly what this ship needed. Hours turned into a day, but Jarek did not tire. He traced energy flows through the ship, connecting dormant systems to active ones. He touched panels that hummed to his fingers, almost like they recognized his human touch. He felt a connection forming, not with the entity, but with the ship itself. The Miradorn vessel responded to human unpredictability, something the aliens had never understood. For the first time, he accessed the ship's logs. Holographic images flickered to life. The Miradorn crew, brilliant and proud, performing experiments on the entity. The footage showed them attempting to merge their consciousness with the black energy. Their expressions were hopeful at first, then terror-filled, then gone. Their bodies remained, but their minds had been consumed. Jarek swallowed hard. He understood now why the auction had been empty. Every other bidder had known enough to stay away. Every alien species feared what the Miradorn had unleashed. Humans, however, were different. By the second day, Jarek began experimenting cautiously. He tapped into the ship's propulsion systems, its energy conduits, and even its advanced sensors. The ship's AI began responding to him more clearly, recognizing his presence as non-threatening but unpredictable. The entity reacted too, pulsing violently whenever he accessed certain systems. But Jarek was ready. He had studied the patterns, observed its reactions, and learned to avoid direct confrontation. Yet curiosity gnawed at him. The entity was dangerous, but it held power. Power beyond anything humanity had ever touched. He needed to understand it, not just for himself, but for humanity's future. "Humans survive because we take risks others won't," he muttered, echoing a thought his father had once told him. "And sometimes we survive because we're smart enough to learn from mistakes." The entity's intelligence began to reveal itself. It could sense his emotions, his thought patterns, even his curiosity. At times he swore it tried to communicate, not with words, but with images, feelings, and flashes of memory from the Miradorn crew. They screamed, begged, and then were silent. Jarek felt a pang of sympathy, not for the Miradorn, but for humanity. He realized that if this energy escaped, no species could contain it. The Miradorn had failed because they relied solely on knowledge and logic. Jarek understood now that human creativity, adaptability, and courage were just as important as raw intelligence, and he intended to use all three. By the third day, Jarek was confident. He had mapped the entity's containment field, understood the ship's quirks, and gained the AI's cautious cooperation. Yet a new problem emerged. The ship itself was unstable. Systems overloaded, corridors twisted unpredictably, and strange whispers echoed in the shadows. The entity was not passive. It was learning, adapting, and probing Jarek's mind. He had to act. Waiting would be dangerous. Humans were not designed to be passive observers. They acted, adapted, and survived. Jarek activated a series of containment reinforcements, diverting power from non-essential systems to stabilize the entity's field. Sparks flew from panels and the ship groaned like a living beast, but slowly the energy stabilized. "You see?" Jarek said aloud, speaking to the AI as if it were a companion. "Humans are not afraid. We survive. We adapt. We win." For the first time, the Miradorn AI's hologram seemed almost impressed. The alien captain's voice flickered with hesitation. "Perhaps humans are different," Jarek smiled. It was more than approval. It was recognition. Humanity was not to be underestimated, even by species that had thought themselves superior. Night, or what passed for night aboard the Rim station, fell again. Jarek sat in the captain's chair, staring at the containment field. The entity pulsed softly, almost like it was breathing. He had learned enough to interact safely, but he could feel it watching, waiting, learning. Every instinct told him that it was dangerous, but human instincts also told him opportunity lay in danger. He leaned back, thinking. Humans had survived on barren worlds, in collapsing civilizations, and against predators far stronger than themselves. The entity was another challenge, a test of humanity's resilience, ingenuity, and courage. And Jarek was ready. The Miradorn ship had become a world of shadows and whispers. Every corridor Jarek walked seemed to pulse with hidden energy. Every corner flickered with alien light. The containment field holding the dark entity had held for days, but he could feel it straining, sensing his presence, testing his limits. Jarek had learned to read the subtle signs, a flicker in the walls, a sudden drop in gravity, the hum of energy in the corridors. It was intelligent, ancient, and patient. It watched him the way a predator watches a clever prey, waiting for a mistake. Humans were not prey, though. He made his way to the central chamber where the containment field shimmered like a black storm held in a cage of light. The entity pulsed violently, reacting to his approach. Shadows stretched along the walls, moving unnaturally. The whispers in his mind grew louder, unintelligible but urgent. Jarek took a deep breath. "All right," he said, voice steady. "Let's see what you want." As he approached, the entity reacted. Waves of dark energy surged outward, and the room shook. Panels sparked, and holographic displays flickered, showing the entity's swirling form. For a moment, Jarek felt the sheer power of it, a consciousness beyond comprehension, capable of crushing the mind of any alien species.
But Jarek was human. He activated the ship's auxiliary systems, diverting energy to the containment shields.
The entity screamed in a language of thought, a sound that resonated directly in his skull. Pain shot through him, but he gritted his teeth, focusing. Humans survived by thinking, adapting, and acting, not by running. The entity lashed out again, sending tendrils of dark energy into the room. They were not physical but mental. Jarek felt them probing, testing his mind. He stumbled back, gripping the console, but then he remembered something fundamental. Humans improvise. Where others followed rules, humans created new ones. He grabbed a secondary control panel, rerouting the ship's energy in a pattern the Miradorn had never considered. Lights flared across the chamber as the containment field pulsed, pushing the entity back. It recoiled. For the first time, the entity paused, studying him. Jarek realized it was learning, not just from the Miradorn, but from him. Humans were unpredictable, reckless, clever. The entity had underestimated him. A slow grin spread across his face. He took another step forward, carefully analyzing the field. The Miradorn AI flickered nearby, hesitant. Its voice trembled, not in fear, but in something close to admiration. Human, different, capable.
Jarek nodded. "I know," he said. "We're not like you."
"We survive because we think outside the box." The entity surged again, a black wave of energy that struck the containment field. Panels exploded, and Jarek was thrown to the floor. Pain seared his arms and legs, but he pushed himself up. Human endurance was more than physical. It was mental, emotional, instinctive. He had survived worse on desolate moons, faced raiders and starvation. This was just another challenge. Jarek realized brute force would not work. The entity was too powerful. He needed strategy, something the Miradorn had ignored, adaptability and creativity. He ran to the ship's gravity control system. By adjusting gravity, he created a subtle distortion in the containment field. The entity pulsed violently, thrashing against the shift. Jarek moved quickly, recalibrating energy flows, connecting panels in ways no Miradorn would dare. For hours he worked, dodging surges of energy and mental assaults. He learned its rhythm, predicting pulses and flares. Each time it struck, he adapted, weaving its attacks into a strategy. Where the Miradorn had failed because they followed rules, Jarek thrived because he broke them. Humans survived by improvising.
And improvisation was a weapon. The entity's power grew desperate.
It extended tendrils of energy into the room, trying to reach his mind directly. Jarek felt shadows in his skull, whispers promising death, insanity, and oblivion. He staggered, gripping the console, and then, instinctively, he did something the entity didn't expect. He laughed. A human laugh, defiant, daring, unafraid. The entity recoiled, as if it had never encountered this response.
Aliens feared it. The Miradorn had crumbled.
Humans laughed in its presence. He rerouted the energy again, this time combining propulsion fields, gravity, and the containment shield in a way that created a feedback loop. Sparks flew, and the entity screamed in a way that shook the entire ship. Panels exploded, corridors warped, and the air shimmered with raw power. And then it paused. For the first time, Jarek saw a flicker of hesitation in the entity. It was studying him, confused by his unpredictability. Humans were chaotic, creative, fearless. The entity had expected logic, patterns, rigid intelligence. Instead, it faced improvisation, courage, and boldness. He moved closer, hand on the central console. He could feel the entity's curiosity, its ancient mind reaching toward him. But he was ready. "Listen," he said aloud. "I don't want to destroy you, but if you leave this ship, humanity dies. You learned from the Miradorn, now learn from me. We survive, we adapt, we win." For a moment, silence. Then the black energy pulsed, shrinking slightly in the containment field. Jarek realized it understood, not in human words, but in the language of logic and survival. It would not escape, for now. Exhausted but triumphant, Jarek slumped into the captain's chair. His body ached, his mind buzzed with the entity's presence, but he had survived. Humans were not just survivors. They were unpredictable, resourceful, and brave. The Miradorn had thought themselves superior, but they had failed where Jarek had succeeded. The AI flickered near him. Human, survived. Entity, contained, unexpected. Jarek smiled, brushing sweat from his forehead. "That's humans for you." He realized something profound. The entity was not just a threat. It was a test. The Miradorn had failed because they had relied solely on knowledge. Humans survived because they used instinct, courage, and creativity. Humanity's greatest weapon was not their technology. It was the human mind itself. Over the next few hours, Jarek stabilized the ship. He repaired minor systems, reinforced the containment field, and recalibrated the energy flows. The entity pulsed quietly, watching, learning. It was contained, but it remained conscious, aware, and potentially dangerous. But that was fine. Jarek was not afraid. Humans thrived where others feared. He had survived the unthinkable, faced an entity older than stars, and lived. He stood at the observation deck, looking out at Rim Station Delta 7. The station slept peacefully, unaware of the danger that lurked in the shadows of the galaxy, and the human who had tamed it. "This ship," he whispered, "is going to change everything. And humanity, we're just getting started." The Miradorn ship hummed softly, almost content, as Jarek walked through its corridors. The entity remained contained, a dark pulse in the heart of the vessel, but it was no longer the terrifying, uncontrollable force it had been. He had survived its first assault, learned its patterns, and outsmarted it where the Miradorn had failed. Yet, Jarek knew this was only the beginning. The ship's true potential and the entity's full power remained locked away. To ignore them would be foolish. Humanity thrived because it acted, even when others hesitated. And Jarek intended to act. He returned to the central chamber, staring at the containment field. The entity pulsed, sending subtle waves of thought and energy into the room. It had stopped attacking, but its presence was undeniable. He could feel its intelligence, its curiosity, even its grudging respect for him. "This ship is ours now," he whispered. "And so is the galaxy, eventually." He began studying the ship's advanced systems, discovering features the Miradorn themselves had never fully used. There were warp capabilities far beyond anything humans had built, energy weapons capable of disintegrating asteroids, and sensors that could scan entire star systems in seconds. Jarek's mind raced with possibilities. A single human had tamed what many considered a ghost ship. The implications were enormous. But he had no desire for mindless conquest. He wanted understanding, exploration, and, if necessary, defense. Humanity had survived countless dangers by being clever, brave, and adaptable. This ship would amplify all of that. He activated the ship's long-range communications array. Using the Miradorn AI's guidance, he broadcast a signal, a warning, not a threat, to nearby systems. Other species might have feared the Miradorn technology, but they had no idea what a human could do with it. The response was immediate. Aliens in nearby colonies detected the ship, puzzled and wary. Word began to spread. A human had claimed a legendary Miradorn vessel, survived an encounter with a terrifying entity, and lived to control it. Rumors multiplied. Jarek smiled. Fear could be a tool. Respect could be earned. Humanity had survived countless threats because it had the audacity to act when others hesitated. Now the galaxy would begin to learn the same lesson. Days passed, and Jarek continued exploring the ship. He unlocked hidden compartments filled with Miradorn data, star maps, experimental technology, and records of battles humans had only dreamed of surviving. Each discovery strengthened his belief in humanity's potential. The entity remained contained, but he studied it too, learning its behavior, energy patterns, and limits. The AI had grown more communicative, almost cooperative. It acknowledged Jarek's ingenuity in ways the Miradorn never had. Human, different. Survives, adapts, it said, in fragmented translation. Jarek chuckled. "We survive because we're human," he replied. "We don't give up. We think, we act, and we win." The AI flickered, a faint glow of approval. The ship, for the first time in centuries, seemed alive with purpose again. Not just the entity, not just the technology, but the human aboard it. Then came the first real test. A patrol fleet of the Therian Collective, a nearby alien species, detected the Miradorn ship and approached, weapons ready. They had no idea a human controlled it, but they assumed a single human could not command such power. They were wrong. Jarek sat in the captain's chair, hands on the controls. He could feel the entity watching, but he ignored it. Humans had faced impossible odds before and survived. Now he had to demonstrate that audacity, creativity, and courage were humanity's greatest weapons. The Therian fleet fired warning shots. Jarek activated the ship's energy shields and replied with a display of power. He rerouted the propulsion systems, creating unpredictable movements, while the energy weapons hummed and flared. The Tharians were shocked. A single human was controlling a vessel of unimaginable power with precision and strategy they had never seen. The entity pulsed inside the ship, observing. Even it seemed impressed by human unpredictability. The Miradorn AI murmured in awe. "Human. Commander." Capable within minutes, the Therian fleet disengaged. They had underestimated a human's ingenuity. Across the system, whispers spread of the human who commanded a legendary ship and survived a power the Miradorn themselves could not control. Jarek knew this was only the beginning. The Miradorn ship had capabilities far beyond any human technology, and the entity within, though contained, was a resource and a danger. He could use it, explore it, and eventually teach humanity to wield it safely. But more importantly, he realized that humans had something no other species could replicate: the combination of fearlessness, creativity, and adaptability. The Miradorn had relied on intelligence alone. The Therians relied on fear. Humans relied on imagination and courage, and that was why they survived, and why they could dominate challenges that others could not.
Weeks later, Jarek made a decision.
He would not hide the ship or the entity. Humanity needed to understand its potential, to see the galaxy not as a place of fear, but as a realm to explore, challenge, and survive in. He began sending messages to scientific communities, explorers, and frontier worlds, warnings, discoveries, and subtle demonstrations of what humans could achieve. Each message contained a warning. Humanity was not to be underestimated. Cleverness, courage, and boldness could rival the deadliest forces in the galaxy. Aliens would soon learn that humans survived, adapted, and thrived where others fell. The entity watched quietly, restrained, but aware. It had learned something too. Humans were unpredictable, resourceful, and dangerous. In ways the Miradorn could never understand, humans were evolution's proof that survival depended not only on strength or knowledge, but on ingenuity and audacity. One night, Jarek stood on the observation deck, gazing at distant stars. The ship pulsed softly beneath him, alive in its own way. He thought about humanity, the countless worlds they had survived on, the dangers they had faced, and the unknowns they would continue to confront. The galaxy was vast, filled with threats beyond comprehension. But humans were something else. They were bold, clever, and fearless. They improvised. They endured. They survived, And with this ship, Jarek held a power that could shift the balance of the galaxy itself. He smiled. Humanity's time was coming. The Miradorn had underestimated humans. The entity had underestimated humans. And now, the rest of the galaxy would learn the same lesson. As the first rays of a distant sun hit the hull of the ship, Jarek activated the warp drive. The stars stretched into lines of light as the vessel leapt across space. The entity pulsed within the containment field, calm but aware. The ship's AI hummed, acknowledging its new captain. Jarek leaned back, hands on the controls. He thought of Rim Station Delta. 7 of the auction that had changed everything, of the courage that had carried him this far. Humanity had survived once again, not through brute force, but through adaptability, creativity, and daring. He whispered to himself. This is only the beginning. The Miradorn ship surged forward, faster than any human vessel had ever traveled. Jarek was no longer just a salvage hunter. He was a pioneer, a commander, and proof that humanity could conquer the unknown. The entity, the ship, and the galaxy itself were witnesses to one undeniable truth. Humans were not to be underestimated, and humanity's legacy was just beginning.